Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at Ironhack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Hey, Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we have Chi with us today. But Chi, before we get started, we want to know, are you prepared to engage?
I am very much so. Rob, thanks for having me here.
Very glad to have you today with us, Chi, because Chi Cheng is a clinical psychologist living in Brisbane, Australia, and he has worked in many psychology settings, including, of course, private practices, as well as correctional centers, universities, and public mental health systems. He is most passionate about working with a wide range of clients using acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, developing training and group therapy, supervising psychologists, and most importantly, playing a lot of board games. And he has a simple mission statement: to promote living a meaningful life in a caring, connecting, and compassionate way. So, Chi, are we missing anything from that, from that intro from your life that you would like to highlight?
No, not at all. Yeah, I think that playing a lot of board games part is really important. So I'm glad you included that.
Fantastic, Chi. So let's get started with understanding what do regular days for you look like. We know that you're a clinical psychologist, so maybe give us some insights into what that looks like in a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in many sense, I might be a little bit of an irregular guest on your podcast because I am a clinical psychologist. So I work in different healthcare systems. So I split my time at the moment working in public and also private systems. So half the week I spend working as a allied health team leader at the moment. I'm responsible for supervising and training a team of counselors, about 40 of them at the moment. The other half of the week, I work in a range of private settings. So I do private supervisions, consultations, I run workshop and training. As you would know too, most recently, I have teamed up with Dr. Zach Fitzwalter, and together we create a newsletter called Game and Learn. We recommend great board games that have a lot of educational values and help trainers, parents, teachers, therapists to use these games to teach important life skills such as teamwork, negotiation, planning, etc., etc. And after work, if I'm very lucky and I could convince my wife, Amy, then we have a few quick board games.
Sounds amazing. So, Chi, we want to sort of dive into a topic, which is something that, our engagers really enjoyed learning from those lessons. And it's of a time when, you were trying to do something probably with board games and, or you were going north, things went south, basically it's one of those fails or first attempts in learning. We want to be there with you and see what happened and perhaps take some lessons away as well.
Yeah, and when I look at the questions, that's definitely an interesting one. And I think back to the very beginning of my time starting to do training and supervisions. Actually, now I didn't know it then, but I was actually already starting to apply the gamifications and game-based solution into my training. So I picked up this role. It's called clinical educator role. So it's new to me. I was in charge of supervising a team of provisional psychologists. That means that they're doing their master degrees, and it was on placements. So I was new and I was keen to develop some fun and engaging training for them. So in the early days, I developed and facilitated some training, and I included a lot of activities, more visuals and examples. And I was just trying to make things more interesting for the students. And I just strongly believe that if your training is interesting, they take away more from your teaching. So anyway, after that, after one of the training sessions, one of my colleagues approached me Now, this is a person who was a lot more experienced in psychology than I was at that point.
Mm.
And she was in the job a lot longer at that point as well. And she came to me and said, "Oh, this is not how we do things. This is not appropriate at all," and walked away like that. So I was left, as you can imagine, left quite shocked and quite unsure of, what did I do wrong? So I spent probably weeks dwelling on that matter. And when I finally brought up the courage and asked for some feedback from this colleague, she basically said, "Oh, it was fine. It was nothing," didn't quite elaborate. So I didn't get any constructive
Huh.
feedback as well. So I was left confused for just a few more weeks. And before I knew it, it was the end of the placement. And everyone, including that colleague and myself, and I think probably 8 or so students, we sat down we always did like a final chat, so it's just an informal chat. And we share what they have found useful, most helpful, what we could have done better, and that sort of things. So someone sat pretty much straight up and said, the training I did for them was the most impressive and the most engaging training they have ever attended, and everyone agreed. So, for 16, 20 weeks, I was just, really, really confused and really sort of feel sorry for myself for what I've done wrong. And end up, people actually really enjoyed it. So the two lessons I took away from that, maybe not a major failure, but it was just not a good use of time and not good use of a mental sort of energy. The first thing is, we just don't want to always do things the traditional ways, the way that it has always been, because, there's always areas that we can improve on. And secondly, there's no need to really dwell on others' opinions for too long. As long as you have done your fair share to self-reflect and to seek constructive feedback from the people you work with or work for. And I've been following these principles ever since, not be afraid to ask for constructive feedback. And, in fact, I just live and breathe sort of feedback these days.
Sounds amazing. Sounds like a very, very important thing to take into consideration, asking for feedback and, testing it out with the real people. And sometimes, it is important to have expert opinions, so to speak. So somebody you respect very much who might come in and say, well,
That's
this
correct,
could be
yeah.
better, this could be improved. But feedback is not, this is terrible or this is great. That's not a lot of feedback. It's, this could be improvable. I think these things here are this and that. Or I really liked this thing that you're doing, keep it up, or maybe even get it even better focus on that. I think is always a very useful feedback. And it's kind of on the person that is giving the feedback, but it's also a little bit on us to request sometimes like clarifications, like, "Oh yeah, thank you for, your feedback. Could you, give me some specific examples of what's wrong? What do you feel could be improved, et cetera, et cetera." So I think those are very, very valuable lessons that we can take away from your story, Chi. Thank you very much.
No worries, and I think you're spot on there. We actually don't have any classes or training to talk about how do we give and receive feedback. But as a matter of fact,
Yes.
that's the most important thing for us to have. The most beautiful gift we can give and receive, really, because without constructive feedback, there's no improvement.
Absolutely. So, Chi, let's turn this around and actually go for a story of success. One of those times where you had this challenge, and using these engaging techniques and these things, it actually worked out well for you, and you could say, "Well, this is a proud moment. This is something that I want to share with other people as well."
Yeah, thanks for asking that. And sometimes it's hard to sort of say, "Oh, this was a success." But I think it's important to look back as well and go, this was indeed not too bad, and that's something that we can be proud of. So just take a step back. I think the one of the biggest challenge I'm facing, maybe because I'm newer to the concept of gamifications myself, because I'm a psychologist by trade. I think is that gamification is a concept and a set of principles that most psychologists, therapists, medical professionals, and clients, they wouldn't consider it in their everyday practice. So what I mean by that is the words games and play, they just have an implied meaning that, or a lot of people would feel that, oh, this is not serious, or this is not
Hmm.
professional, or this is not with therapeutic significance. And that's the power of language is very important. So when clients come into your therapy room to discuss what is distressing them, or when 40 clinicians walk into your training room and spend their valuable day looking for ways to improve their skills, if I say games and play, straight up, it might make quite a few of them feel uncomfortable, to say the least. So this is continue to be one of the biggest challenge that I am facing, which is how do I incorporate those gamification principles and elements into therapy and training in subtle and yet meaningful ways, and make sure that I'm attentive to the client's stories still, and make sure that I continue to be compassionate to whatever emotion they're bringing to the room, and make sure those games-based solutions I'm bringing actually serve a bigger purpose in the therapy room. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Why not? So
Yeah.
it's an ongoing challenge, and I don't know if you've like by asking yourself these questions and trying and doing it better sometimes and not so great other times. Do you have any, I don't know, any insights that you've gotten from this process?
Um, I think I definitely one of the questions that I saw from the interview is about the process, right? So over time, I think I start to create a process for myself. It's definitely not like, all right, let's sit down and think about how am I going to approach this. It has been a very back and forth process. If that's okay, can I share a example with you?
Absolutely, absolutely. And let's get into your process then. Absolutely.
Yeah. So the example I would like to share with you is in 2018, I wrote a 4-week therapy skill group. It's called Navigating Happiness. So it was developed for a clientele that had experienced more complex and severe mental health issues, such as major depression or anxiety disorder, schizophrenia, and personalities vulnerabilities. And a lot of the time, it's a mixture of all of them as well. So in this group, I incorporate my gamification principles to make it as fun, as meaningful, and as practical as possible. So, for example, we create a story arc and like an adventure, if you will, for the clients that which is how they could live a happier and more meaningful life. That is the story we're trying to tell. That's just the story that we're trying to live. And then we help them to break the big goals into smaller steps and help them to track their process each week as well. We encourage them to experience and try and fail and learn, because this is such a low risk setting. If they set a goal and they don't get it right the next week, there's no penalties whatsoever. And we emphasize that the difficult tasks that they're working on are actually the worthwhile one. Just like defeating the boss in Dark Souls, really difficult, challenging game. When we finally achieve something that has been difficult, we get a massive buzz, we get a massive sense of achievement. So the result of it is quite amazing, because we have been running the groups for 4 years now. And with our clientele, it's quite easy for people to disengage, for people to drop out. But I'm very glad to let you know that in Navigating Happiness, after 4 years of running it, we are still maintaining a 95% completion rate, which is unheard of with this clientele. And the overall life satisfaction that we track as a outcome measure has recorded a statistically significant improvement after just a 4-week group. And the significance improvement is maintained at the 6-month follow-up phone call as well. So by incorporating all these subtle gamifications, processes, and principles into the program, it really, really helps people to engage the therapeutic content of the groups much, much better.
Sounds amazing. Thank you very much for sharing all of that, Chi, because it is always insightful Because one of the things that we try to do in the podcast, and that hopefully engagers when they're listening are trying to do as well, is gather inspiration in the sense of kind of getting into other people's heads and seeing how their head is operating, so to speak, like what's going on there, and how can we actually use that in our own practice, right? So we're thinking of doing it,
Mhm.
or we're actually doing it. Either way, it's seeing, having those insights, and checking out what are some potential places where we could either incorporate some of what you said, absolutely do exactly the way you do it. So that was very, very insightful. Thank you very much.
No, you're welcome. I'm so glad someone would find that helpful. That's a very encouraging thought to have as well. Yeah.
Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. So, Chi, what would you say is something, of course, no silver bullets, but, something that could be maybe a best practice, something that you would say, well, when you're using, gamification, when you're thinking of board games and incorporating them into your work, is there a best practice, something that you would do that would at least make, in general, would make your work better?
Yeah, and please feel free to chime in here, Rob, because I was just thinking about how do I usually manage that process. So I actually will write out a four-step plan for myself, and I'm so glad that I went through the exercise because from now on I actually know exactly what I'm doing myself. So thank you for the opportunity. So the first step I have in that process of applying game-based solution is understanding the clientele and the settings as well. I think that in psychology settings, every client and every setting is unique. So I'll never apply a cookie cutter approach to them. There's no one set of, yeah, I'm always going to use these three principles of gamifications. I always, try to gamify these three components for each of the clients. It just doesn't work that way. So therapy and training needs to be tailored to a client's need. And therefore, the game-based solutions need to be carefully considered as well. So when I try to incorporate games into my training and therapy, situations could range from this is absolutely not appropriate whatsoever to games are actually the therapy in this session or for this client. So that range is quite big, obviously, and the assessment skills does come with experience. But most importantly, I think the communications with what we're trying to do and what the client is trying to achieve and get from the therapy, it's really important. And this brings us to the second point. And I think the second point is to clearly define the training or therapy objectives. The game-based solution need to serve a purpose. I think I've mentioned that before. And that is set with the clients from the very beginning of the therapy. Hopefully, if we can get that straight away. If it is with training, that objective should be set even before the training is developed, right? So once you have this clearly defined or agree on with the client, it will become so much easier and clearer for yourself as well to apply the game-based solution or if they are actually appropriate in the settings at all. So that's my first two steps. How does that sound so far, Rob?
Amazing.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll keep going then. So the third step I have is decide how to apply the game-based solution. In psychology or therapy setting, at least, I find the game-based solutions are more effective if they apply in a subtle, mindful, and sensitive way that always respects the clients and settings. Like I said before, the word game and play, it just might not gel with every single client. So, like in Navigating Happiness, the group that I mentioned, we help participants to break their own goals into doable steps and celebrate when they take them off one by one. This is, seen by many, many games, right? All the good games that you play have a progress track, and give you achievement, give you a satisfying thing when you achieve something. But on the other hand, we wouldn't overly gamify the process. For example, we wouldn't give participants a level or make them a D&D Dungeon and Dragon character because that might actually be quite invalidating and quite insensitive in that setting. So, how do you apply it needs to be very, very sensible. And the final step I've got is evaluate the outcome. So maybe because I'm a psychologist, we love doing research, we love collecting data, we love tracking outcomes. So if I'm trying to do something different and new, I always want to know how my clients and participants enjoyed it or not. So I will have outcome measures, evaluation forms ready, and I'll collect both qualitative and quantitative data as well. Furthermore, it comes to the feedback as well. I love to invite my colleagues to observe my work and give me constructive feedback. Like I said, I think feedback is just beautiful. It's the best gift that we could give each other. So, that's my 4-step process to, go round and round and round and help myself becoming more familiar with how do I apply game-based solution in a sensible way.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So talking about, your solutions and talking about those recommendations, you've been in the interview for a bit, you also know Zach, who was recently as well a guest. Is there somebody
Yes.
that comes to your mind that you would say, I would like to hear the insights from this other person, sort of a future guest for Professor Game?
Oh yeah, for sure. So when I hear that questions, immediately two people came to my mind. The first one is Jamie Madigan, who is the writer of Getting Gamers, and I actually believe that you already got him on the show before.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and I recently finished this book, Gaming Gamers, talking about understanding the game developers, seller, players, and that was a fascinating read. So I really recommend that book as well, Getting
And,
Gamers.
and he has another book as well. It's called The Engagement Game.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Haven't got a chance to read it yet, but that is definitely in my to read list. The other person, because we talk about board games here as well. Maybe it would be great to have a famous board game designer come on the show and talk about how do they apply the game-based solutions and make really engaging and fascinating board games. So, a name that came straight to mind is Yuri Rosenberg, who has designed over 100 board games. And his games are really amazing. Bonanza is his first game, and I'll give you 100 guesses, Rob, and I don't think you can guess what is the theme of that game.
I have no clue.
It's about being a bean farmer and trading beans with each other.
All
And
right.
to try to be the most successful bean farmers. And in 100 years, I would not have guessed that would be the first game of that would be a game at all. And that was his first really successful game that he published. Great game as well. We're going to recommend it at some point with our Game and Learn newsletter. A few other games: Patchwork, Fist for Odin, New York Zoo, both all awesome games. So, if somehow you can invite him on the show, I would thank you a million times.
We'll definitely do our best. And you were mentioning, famous, so to speak, board game designers. We did have the designer of Pandemic. So you might want to look
Oh,
into that one as well.
way. No way. That sounds amazing. Yes, I'm going to look into that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now we know who would be a couple of people you would like to listen to. Definitely Jamie Madigan has been here, so you can listen to that episode for sure. And in that same streak of recommendations, is there any book that you would recommend to an audience like this one, like the Engagers, who are, either looking for a specific inspiration or general inspiration, or it could even be science fiction that you found has been interesting. That is entirely up to you. What book would you recommend this audience?
Yeah, when it comes to book recommendations, one book that I almost always recommend is a book about acceptance and commitment therapy ACT. So that is the key approach that I use in therapy. And in one sentence, accepting commitment therapy is about helping us to make room for all our thoughts and feelings, don't letting it jerk us around and push us around, control our actions, and then put that energy that we can free up, the time that we can free up into activities, actions that actually align with who we truly want to be. So that's acceptance commitment therapy in a nutshell. And one book that is really great is called The Happiness Trap, and it's written by Dr. Russ Harris. And that is a self-help style book. And it's quite, now I think about it as well, it has got some gamifications elements in it as well. There's tons of interactive exercise, experiential exercises. It asks you to finish a part of the book and then practice it for a week or two before you come back to the next part. Now I think about it, it's a very, very well written book using gamifications principles. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that one.
There you go. Well done, then.
Just everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, it's something that just happens, right?
Yeah. When you want to make things engaging, you just use it so naturally.
Yeah, whether intentionally or not. I do this when I'm sort of deconstructing a past app or something like that. I always say like, oh, here I'm doing reverse engineering and I'm assuming that these are the things that they thought. But as you can see, the result is that they did actually something that is gamification, the way that we understand it, right? Whether they did it consciously and intentionally, or they were just looking for something to get the people engaged, and the result was gamification. That's a completely different subject, but that's something that happens when you're trying to do that for sure.
Yeah, that's very much my experience as well, because gamification is a fairly new term to myself. It only came to me about 3 years ago when I met Zach, actually. And then when I know a little bit more about it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is what I've been looking for. This is what I've been applying and trying to do. So it's been really helpful, actually, having a name to the principles that I'm trying to do.
Amazing. So talking about recommendations, you've talked about amazing other people and amazing books as well. What would you say is your superpower, that thing that you do at least better than most other people in the world?
I think my superpower is that most of the time I am not too afraid of making a fool of myself. So, I would go on to training and make jokes about myself and pick on myself and, share some of that embarrassing history and stories as well. And, maybe practice make better. After I've done it a few times, I still feel a little bit anxious about, how people judge me in the room. But at the same time, I just find that such an engaging way as well. And really humanize people. Everyone will be like, oh, you think that as well. You think you're not a good therapist as well. And I'm like, yeah, I have that thought almost every day. But at the same time, I don't need to let that thought completely overwhelm me and drive every single decisions that I make. And and sharing a little bit about myself, feeling embarrassed in front of people, feeling vulnerable in front of people. I think that is not easy to do, and I'm glad to report, Rob, that I think I have practiced enough that it has become a little bit of my superpower.
A superpower and a habit, which is a good thing as well, right?
Yeah, I think so. It is a habit, but I'm still conscious about, how will people feel and think if I say such things. But so far, I haven't had any, really, really sort of big backlash yet. So I'm just going to keep going until it's proven otherwise.
Amazing. Sounds great. So this is a very difficult question for most guests. I'm sure for you it'll be a difficult one as well. And it is all about, what would you say is your favorite game?
Oh, it is indeed difficult. Are we talking about computer games or video games or board games?
That is entirely up to you.
That's entirely up to me. Since you have mentioned you had the creator of pandemic, in the podcast, I would like to say that we've been playing a lot of simpler board games, for our newsletter. But the best board game I'm enjoying the most right now is indeed Pandemic Legacy. Season 0. Do you know what is a legacy game?
Yeah, I was actually discussing that. Zach mentioned that game recently as well in his interview, and we were saying that the legacy is when you kind of break the old game in a way, and I was very
That is
nervous about
exactly
the
right.
concept.
Yeah. So a legacy game, you basically hit the nail in the head there. So a legacy game means that you are playing the game over usually a couple dozen times. But every single time you play, you win or lose, right? And you will have impact on the story and rules as well in some ways, making it familiar. And every game is more refreshing, making it somewhat safe because you know what you're playing with, but every game there's something different that is challenging. So I'm really enjoying that. So for listeners who don't know, Pandemic is a game that you play as a team of medical professionals and you are racing against the clock to save humanity from viruses. I know it hit home a little bit too close. But in the Legacy Season 0, which is the third installment of Pandemic Legacy, there are three of them, there is a major plot twist, which is you are a team of medical doctors, but you are also recruited as spies. So that's really exciting. And I'll leave it up to you to discover the major excitement of a legacy game. But yeah, if you're new to board games, please get if you want to get some great games to start with, some recommendations, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, Game and Learn.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was actually one of the things I was going to ask you next, before we take off. Definitely, if you have any sort of final piece of advice, anything else you want to leave the engagers with, and of course, let us know where we can find out more about your work.
Yeah, great. Quick advice. It's just a very humble experience. I think. I'll say if you have some ideas, get started, find ally, and make mistakes. It is okay. We don't have to wait until we have the perfect plan before we start. And when we work on our project, we'll find mistakes and we'll correct it. And that's how we make something hopefully great happen. So I'll leave listeners with one quote that I've learned recently, and I think it's a one that applies to many situations, which is all the easy problems in the world have been solved. All the worthwhile ones are difficult.
Huh. Sounds great. And Chi, where can we find out more about you, about your work, and about the things that you're doing if we're curious to keep up the conversation?
Yeah, so if you're interested in getting in touch, please, you can email me at gameandlearn@substack.com. Or you can just find us at gameandlearn.substack.com as well. So if you search Chi or Zach, Game and Learn will pop up. There you can subscribe to our newsletter. It's absolutely free for everyone. And you can email us and contact us that way.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all your insights, for sharing your ups and your downs with us today on the podcast, Chi. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over.
Oh, that makes me a little bit sad, but it's game over, buddy.
Engagers, it's fantastic to have you here, and thank you for listening to the Professor Game podcast. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Chi. Do you have any questions that you would like future guests? Please go to professorgame.com/question and ask your question. If it is selected and you have pretty good chances, it'll come up in a future episode and you will get your answer live with one of our guests. And remember, before you go on to your next mission, before you click continue, remember to subscribe or follow, whatever that looks like, on your favorite podcast app for free, and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.